the Supermarine Spitfire. Really, there can't be too much said about the aeroplane because it is a legendary machine. We'll just let you hear the sound of this magnificent Rolls-Royce Merlin on start. Not as much swerving, but you can see him actually snaking the aircraft in the taxi and looking out either side so that he can actually see what's ahead of him. The only other way of doing that, apart from doing that S-turning, is to actually have somebody sitting on the wing. And you'll see during the Second World War, some of the movies that were produced, you'll see them either S-turning, or you'll see a guy there and he's pointing directions and telling the pilot exactly any obstacles or where he has to go. Of course, the Spitfire, the legendary aircraft, stemming from the designs of R.J. Mitchell, also stemming from the magnificent Schneider Cup racing seaplanes, Supermarine design aircraft, because that fitted the best airframe that they possibly could with the highest performing engine that was then available coming out of Rolls-Royce, specially manufactured for the task. But with what was happening in Europe, similar to what the guys who formed the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, they could see what was going on. They needed an advanced fighter. Germany, who at the end of World War I was forbidden to have any sort of air arm, obviously developed an air arm in secret, were designing and manufacturing world-class fighter machines like the Messerschmitt 109, and even though it didn't go into production, the Heinkel 112. So Britain was looking towards modernising its air force. Of course, Hawker, the name is synonymous with interwar fighters and bombers like the Hart and the Demon. They developed the Hurricane, and it was developed earlier than the Spitfire. It had a thick wing. It was fitted at the time with up to 12 machine guns, generally later on 8. It was designed to be very highly manoeuvrable, but it wasn't anywhere near the manoeuvrability class of the Spitfire. The Spitfire had a special wing design, very, very complex, and the prototype flew in 1936. When you think about that prototype, the final production Seafires, the navalised version, the FR-47, it had an engine well over 2,000 horsepower. It had contra-rotating propellers, and when loaded, it weighed 3 times the weight of the prototype Spitfire. The first squadron to receive the Spitfire was 19 Squadron RAF, and that was in 1938. Of course, the first Spitfires that came out, they had fixed pitch wooden propellers. They went on later on to have the variable pitch 3-blade de Havilland air screws, and then of course the 4-blade with virtually a wooden propeller again, but variable pitch. 5-blade to absorb the power of the Griffin, and then the contra-rotating props of the later powered Griffins. 24 different variants of the Spitfire were produced. There were about 20,300 of them, and there were 8 different variants of the Seafire, the navalised version. They had the Merlin and the Griffin engine in them as well. So the total production came to well over 22,000 machines. This particular aircraft is a Mark 16, and most of the Mark 16s that you'll see have a bubble canopy, and people think that they didn't operate them during the war. They did. 485 Squadron, the Kiwis, Royal New Zealand Air Force, flying as part of the RAF, they operated them. But this is what they call a high-back Mark 16. It's one of the early production aircraft. Aircraft is fitted with 4 machine guns and 2 20mm Canon, same Canon that's in the Boomerang. You'll notice the sound of the aeroplane. It sounds a little bit more growly than a normal Spitfire, and if you listen carefully you can hear the whistle from the supercharger, much more prominent than on the Mark 8. This airplane has a direct connection with the Royal Australian Air Force. This aircraft flew with number 453 Squadron RAAF, operating as part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force, Royal Air Force, and was one of the first squadrons to land in Normandy after D-Day. That beautiful elliptical wing plane form that is the instant recognition feature of a Spitfire. 453 Squadron had commenced operations in the war. They were actually in action against the Japanese, flying Brewster Buffaloes, an obsolete fighter near Singapore and on the Malayan Peninsula. They were decimated during that operation, but reformed in England, flying Spitfire aircraft. This aeroplane was delivered to the squadron immediately after it started its operations from behind the beachheads there in Normandy. It was delivered brand new, and the first person to receive the aeroplane was a guy called Russell Leith. He was the A-Flight commander, and when this aeroplane flew for the first time here, when we had the two of them flying at our big opening, Russell was able to see his former machine. He was able to talk to us about some of the operations that took place with this aircraft. When they were flying the machines, they didn't have the pointy wingtips on them. They cut them down. They had a small fairing over the end of the wing outboard of the aileron to improve the rate of roll and the low-level capabilities of the aircraft. That he flew with this particular machine were on bombing missions looking for V1 sites, the pilotless missile that were being fired from France and Belgium heading towards London. Described that on one of the missions that he was involved with looking for these V1 sites over Belgium, the aircraft were all at low level, all in line astern, flying over a wood, and as they got to a spot over the middle of the wood, a V2 was actually launched right in front of them heading towards London. Obviously, post-World War II, there were thousands and thousands of Spitfires that were surplus to the RAF's requirements. This aircraft went through a number of maintenance units until it was finally disposed of. When the Battle of Britain movie was being formulated, one of the guys who was a very handy Spitfire maintenance guy, very experienced on the engine and airframe, he was actually tasked with keeping the Spitfires in the movie flying. And his payment was this aeroplane. Nothing like what you see right now, but it was the aeroplane, less an engine, but virtually otherwise complete. He started the rebuild of the aircraft. It couldn't be completed, and then Sir Tim Wallace from New Zealand saw the aeroplane, had it rebuilt, and took it over to New Zealand. Many of you who have been to Wanaka would have seen this aeroplane.